All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. It's okay if you're coming in a little late, but good evening, everyone. My name is Anna, and I'm an occupational therapist and the community outreach coordinator at the NAPA Denver Clinic. We're just so glad you guys could join us for this webinar tonight, focused on CVI and the pediatric population, as I know it's very prevalent across all the NAPA clinics. Today, we're honored to welcome three incredible individuals who bring a wealth of knowledge, experience, and perspective to this conversation. First, we'll hear from Janet Anderson, an experienced orientation and mobility specialist who has dedicated over 35 years to working with children with visual impairments. Joining Janet is Paula Landry, the program director and co-founder of A Shared Vision. A Shared Vision is the leading provider of early intervention vision services across Colorado. So together, Janet and Paula will offer valuable insights into early intervention strategies and practical approaches to supporting children with CVI. Following their presentation, we'll hear from Rachel Worden, a passionate parent and advocate whose journey began when her child was diagnosed with CVI and she actually goes to the NAPA Center in Austin. Since then, Rachel has immersed herself in education and advocacy, and she brings a deeply personal and empowering perspective to the challenges and victories of navigating CVI as a parent. As we go, please feel free to write any questions you have in the Q&A portion, and then at the end, we will go through as many of those questions as we can and have our three wonderful ladies answer the questions for us. So with that being said, let's start with Janet and Paula. Let me share my screen real quick.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anna.
One thing I want to add while Anna's sharing the screen is, in addition to being an orientation and mobility specialist, I'm also a teacher for children with visual impairment, and some people shorten it to TVI.
Right. Awesome. I am going to spotlight both Janet and Paula, so as they talk, hopefully their screens will pop up. But everyone else should be good to go. Spotlight. Spotlight. Alrighty. Can you see that, ladies?
Yes.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna. As you said, Janet and I are both TVIs and O&Ms, which is the abbreviation for that. Janet over 35 years, and I was started in the field about 23 years ago. So a lot of history with both of us. Janet has experience with not only the littles, the itty bitty 0 to 3, but also through school age through 18 and then some. So my experience is primarily with birth to 3 and birth through 5. With the Shared Vision right now, it is specifically birth to 3. You can advance the screen, Anna. Thank you. Okay, so when we were first asked to join you, Anna asked if we would cover a few different topics, which are really basically what is CVI, what is cortical visual impairment, the effects of CVI on daily activities, how we support children who have CVI, and then just briefly some strategies and environmental modifications that we can use and put into place for kiddos who have CVI as a diagnosis. So first of all, CVI is such a complex and vast field, and it is growing by the day. For years and years, we really didn't know a lot about it, but as we've done research, it's really taken off over the last several years, and we know so much more. That being said, we still have a lot to learn and are still trying to figure out and understand about CVI. So we are going to go through things very quickly tonight, just because we do have a very limited amount of time. But I hope this will be just a quick, good intro for you. and just give you sort of a brief overview of the topic. And then I know we have some resources to share with you afterwards if you for when you're ready to do the deep dive on CVI. So starting off, I just want to talk really briefly about the different types of visual impairment. So basically, we have ocular visual impairments, which really affect the eye. It's the physical parts of the eye. It could be, anything from cataracts to retinal degenerations, glaucoma, anything that just really specifically affects the eye. And then we have the brain-based visual impairments, which is the CVI. So I think it really varies by region what it's called. So CVI, cortical visual impairment, has been the most common term used. In Europe, they're using cerebral visual impairment. In Colorado, some of our doctors are really leaning more towards brain-based visual impairments. So you may hear various terms used, but just for simplicity, we'll just use CVI tonight. So CVI then really is about the brain and the processing of it. So if you think about the information going back into your brain and the processing centers, that's where the CVI comes about. So it's how your brain is understanding and interpreting the visual information your eyes are taking in. And that can be affected by numerous things, depending on your child and their diagnoses. Sometimes it's caused by, prematurity. It can be caused by head injuries. It can be caused by strokes. It can be caused by genetic variants. All kinds of different things can impact how the brain is processing and understanding that information. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But there's also a third type of visual impairment, which is a combination. So many of our kiddos we see have both ocular visual impairments and cortical or brain-based visual impairments as well, which just makes it that much more complex. But just knowing as we go on that there are those three different types of visual impairments that are out there, and your child does have a possibility of having. We can move on. Thank you so much. So CVI, as we said, really affects how the brain is processing. And I think, not to oversimplify it, but given the time we have, one of the best ways I think to really compare it, or how to compare it, is to think about your eyes as a camera and your brain as like a print picture. So I don't know how many of you remember back in the days with cameras and film, where you buy film and you take all your pictures and then you would drop it off at Walgreens or Target or wherever to have those pictures processed. And then you'd be so excited to get those pictures back. And sometimes they would turn out great and sometimes not so much. They might be blurry, they might be fuzzy. There could be all kinds of different things going on with those pictures. And that's a little bit how I would describe CVI. So somewhere along the processing part of that. So if your eyes are healthy and they're taking in visual information, somewhere in the processing piece of getting that information back to your brain, how it's taking everything in, like through the visual pathways, which is really like the information highway from your eyes to your brain, and how what your brain is doing with that information. Does it recognize it? Does it understand it? How does it make sense of the information it receives to produce that picture, that tangible picture? What we know about CVI is that with really good support and strategies, research has told us and shown us that we can see a lot of improvements in how kids are able to process that information, that visual information they're receiving over time, just because of the neuroplasticity of brains. And again, we know with good support and practice and repetition over and over again, we can really see some good improvements with how children are able to use their vision. So The main thing with CVI is that it affects the access of visual information, and what that impact leads to then is the accessibility of information to children. So how are they receiving information? We know that 80 to 90% of what children learn, especially birth to 3, birth to 5, is through vision. And so if that's impacted in any way, that takes away a lot of really good, important information that they need to have. And then that becomes a challenge on our parts as parents and teachers and therapists of how we are going to get that information into those little brains so they can continue to grow and develop in a manner we want them to. So then we have to think about how we are presenting information to them in a way that's accessible. What we also know about CVI is that it affects everybody differently. And I'm sure you've all heard this, is that if you've seen one child with CVI, you've seen one child with CVI. And that is really very true. So as we go on now, we're going to talk about different characteristics and behaviors of CVI and some typical, like I said, behaviors that we see with CVI. They can be in any combination of those. And again, it really does depend on your child and their individual, just who they are as individuals really is how it affects them. What CVI means for one child may be completely different for another. There may be some similarities, but overall, it really and truly is very different. I don't have a number of children, and I'm sure, Janet, you probably don't know a number off the top of your head who you've worked with CVI for the past 35 years, but I can tell you there are some who I do feel like are similar, but for the most part, they really are very unique and individual. Perfect. Thank you, Anna. So, like I said, we're going to go through these 16 visual behaviors and characteristics. Tonight, I'm going to cover the Perkins CVI profile, which is the most recent one to be published. Over the last several years, several different assessments and have been produced and published, and just with research with varying numbers of characteristics or behaviors, some as low as 10, but so for the ease, we're just going to use the Perkins one. They cover 16, and I think that this is the most simplified one. It's a lot of different terms on other on some of the other assessments, but for the most part, they're all the same thing. They're just broken down into different kind of just named differently in different categories. But I do think this Perkins one covers pretty much everything we're looking for in those CVI profiles. So again, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly just to give you a very broad understanding, basic understanding of kind of what each of these things are. These are the things that when I go into a home, when Janet goes into a home to work with families and children, these are the things that we're looking for and we're assessing, and not just assessing from the visual standpoint, but how it's affecting everything going on with those kiddos. So the first one is visual attention, and that is really the foundation for all of the rest of vision. How well your child is attending to something visually. Are they looking? Are they able to hold their gaze on a face, on light, on a toy? How long are they able to do that? That's kind of the basics of that. If sometimes kiddos are only able to look very briefly, and then they have to look away. Looking is really, really difficult, especially for itty bitties, and until they've had practice doing it. But we know, again, like I've said, we can increase that time often with some really good strategies and supports, which Janet's going to chat about with you in a little bit. The next thing we look for is really visual recognition. Does your baby recognize when you're coming in? Does he notice, like, oh, there's my mama? Do you get a smile, or maybe not even a smile, but a glance or a look, or like some understanding of like, yep, there's my mama. It might be looking at a different toy. Can they pick their favorite toy out from a separate toy? Do they, is it something that they recognize? Oh, I've seen that before. The next thing we're looking at is what we call form accessibility. And that is really, a lot of times in CVI, we'll talk about like those salient features. What's the one piece of an object or something that they can, they kind of cling on to? That's the like the most tangible thing that is. It's the recognition of shapes. Like, can they understand, if I were to show two different balls, like, a red ball from a blue ball, or a ball from a box, could they tell the difference between the shape of that? A lot of times kids will, maybe they're able to see it, but their brain still doesn't quite understand what it's looking at or what's in front of them. They might have to touch it and hold it and feel it before they really understand like what that form is, what the shape is. The response interval, oftentimes, and you may have heard this referred to as visual latency, sometimes it takes kids a little bit of time, or we'll call it warm-up time, before they can look or hold their visual attention on an object or a face. Sometimes that can be a few minutes of warm-up time. Sometimes it can be 15 or 20 minutes of warm-up time. What the impact of that is thinking about like a child in a classroom. If you need 15 or 20 minutes of visual warm-up time, oftentimes that activity is long past when the child's getting, just kind of getting warmed up. So those are good things to know about your child, and to have others who are working with your child know and understand, so they can set up classrooms and therapies accordingly. Impact of color. This is a really common thing we hear about with CVI is oftentimes kids will have a favorite color, or a color they respond to the fastest or the best. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's yellow. I think that's what's reported a lot of times in the research. In my experience, that is not always necessarily the case with those two colors. It can be really any color. But again, that's really important to know when you're trying to gain, that visual attention. Sometimes you might have a kiddo who will only look at things that are blue, and so you have all the blue toys, and then we start changing it up a little bit to get their attention onto other colors. But color really truly can have an impact on that visual attention and their curiosity. Impact of light. Not only is the impact of light on sort of like, the lighting in a room, or, too much lighting, like task lighting, but it can also just be like light up toys. I've had a lot of kids who will only look at toys that light up. And sometimes, if it doesn't light up, they're not interested at all. So thinking about how to work towards that and how to use light to your advantage, or to your child's advantage, rather. The impact of movement, again, can be really challenging with some kids. Some kids may need a little bit of movement in order, again, to gain their visual attention and then be able to look at it. For other children, things that are moving might be too hard for them to see. So they might not be able to see anything unless it is static or holding still. For little babies who aren't moving yet, or children who don't have a lot of mobility yet, that may not come into play as much. But for children who are starting to take steps or are walking, that might become a factor as they are starting to move through the environment. Then you have sort of the movement of their bodies, and then the movement of things, passing them, or what appears to feel like they're, coming towards them as they move through the environment. And that can feel a little bit scary for some children too. The impact of clutter and crowding. I think the best way to describe this for me is thinking about like a Where's Waldo book, like those, search and find, like Where's Waldo in that crazy book of, all the different scenes and what's going on, and how it's really hard to, one, recognize where Waldo is, what he looks like, first of all, and then find him. Like, you really have to look at each and every individual thing. And so it's not just like the clutter of that, but then it's like everything is all crowded together. So if I showed, some kids a picture of just where's Waldo on his own, or where Waldo on his own, on a single, a plain piece of white paper, a plain piece of black paper, that would be much easier to see than trying to find him first in that crazy scene. So thinking about that, for some of our kids, maybe one thing is too much, maybe two things they can handle, but when you add a third one in, that one's too much. So that also has an effect. Thank you. Visual field abilities. So we have kind of visual fields, so upper, lower. A lot of times with CVI, the lower fields are impacted. Sometimes we have kiddos who have a hemianopia, where maybe they're only seeing things out of the right side of each eye, and so they're not seeing things on their left side. Again, that really can affect where, like, placement of toys and food and where you're standing in order to gain their attention. If a kiddo's being, a friend is waving at them from across the room, they might not be able to see them if they're on the left side until they move to the middle or to the right side. Visual curiosity. Are they excited and interested in looking at things? Some kiddos just aren't. Looking is really, really, really hard. And if it's hard, most kids don't like to do those things. So what can we do? How can we, motivate them and entice them to pay attention, or to want to look at things? Sensory integration, I think, kind of falls under that part of things being really hard. A lot of times we'll have kiddos, if they're working on, motor control, if they don't have a lot of trunk or neck stability, are they able to use their vision at the same time? Probably not. If they're really working to hold their heads up, looking may be the first thing that goes. Using your vision oftentimes is the first sense that goes when you're working on other really, hard motor tests or motor activities. Access to people, that's that facial recognition. Do they recognize them? Are they able to recognize facial expressions? Can they tell, like, is their mama smiling at them, or is their mama not so happy? And are they able to recognize what that means, and some of those cues? Visual guidance of upper limbs. A lot of times we'll see children who, again, this kind of goes back into that sensory integration piece, they're unable to look and reach at the same time. So we may be holding a toy up for a little one to look at and then reach where we want them reaching and grabbing, and they might not be able to do that at the same time. So you may see them look away before they're able to reach for the toy. A lot of times we'll read that as like, oh, they looked away, they're not interested, when in fact it's not the case. They are interested, they just can't do those things together at the same time. The visual guidance of the lower limbs is the same idea, really. It's just with the feet. We see that affecting kiddos more, like when they are starting to learn how to walk or stand and take steps. Like, they can't quite tell where things are, where that depth perception may be affected and coming in. So we might see kiddos, unable to or have more difficulty managing going up and down stairs, or maybe tripping off, the curve of a sidewalk, or just being fearful of crossing over from sidewalk to grass. It might look like, even if it's the same level, it might not look the same level. And then the last two things we look for really are the appearance of the eyes. Sometimes kiddos will have like a strabismus, maybe one eye turns in or out, or maybe both eyes, or maybe they're just not working together. That's really like what we would call like eye teaming, how well their eyes are working together. And we need that eye teaming, again, for just all the good information to be going back into the brain. And then movement of the eyes. Are the eyes, I guess that really is the eye teaming, are they able to work together? Are they shifting their gaze, from one toy to another to make a choice? Can they look at their mama up close, or can, and then find their, a sibling, behind them or to the side of them? So are they able to, smoothly and move their eyes to look at what they want to look at. Last thing here before Janet takes over, I just want to say is this, again, CVI is so complex, and some of these things that I just went through, those 16 behaviors, may or may not resonate with you. Maybe one or two of them does, maybe all 16 of them do, and maybe it could be dependent on the day. Some of those things you may see more of when your child's not feeling well, or if they're overheated, or they're in a really crowded, loud, busy environment. But knowing that again, what affects your child at one point may be different from day to day. And again, will definitely be different from other children with the same diagnosis. Janet, I'm going to let you take over.
Yep, just the next slide, Anna. Perfect. Perfect. So I'm going to talk about environmental modifications, and these are going to directly correlate to some of the things that Paula talked about. I'm going to go kind of fast because I think we're under a time crunch. Is that right, Anna?
Yes, we're not under a strict time crunch, but we just want to make sure we have enough time for question and Q&A at the end.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let me read.
Yes, so I'm going to talk about environmental modifications, and they'll directly correlate to some of the things that Paula talked about. And again, I just want to say something that Paula mentioned. I just want to reiterate that it's important to just read your child's cues. Every child is different, and consult with a teacher for the visually impaired or a TVI to see where your child is functioning with their vision and what specific strategies are most important for your child. I'm only going to do some of them. Know that there's lots more to think about. The first one is to remove that visual clutter. Very important. Some ways you can do that. You can organize and or remove furniture and decorations from the play or working area. You can wear a plain colored shirt. I wore a black one today, and I see Paula and Rachel both do too. It just helps, again, simplify. So if the child is looking at you, it's simplifying that visual presentation. If you aren't able to remove furniture, decorations, you can always use a black sheet or use a black trifold to put in front of the child to help block out that extraneous information. Like Paula said, present one item at a time if they're having trouble with multiple items, and put it against a plain black background or a plain contrasting background. If you position things at near, that also helps reduce the clutter. So if you think about looking at something 4 feet away, there's all these other things in the background. But if you move that same thing within 12 inches or maybe even 14 inches, you are blocking out all the stuff in the background. Next is positioning of your child, and it's really important to make sure that the child is well supported when you're working on using their vision. It's hard for them to use their vision and work on a physical skill, or like sitting up at the same time or walking. It's hard to do both at the same time. Often children have trouble with that lower field, like Paula talked about, and something that you can do is use a slant board. So you can either buy one or make one to bring the things up to a slant or to a almost vertical position rather than flat. The use of color, light, and movement. First, let's talk about color. Highly saturated colors help elicit visual attention. So that might be the place to start. And if you are working on something at a distance or further away, you can use color to help gain the child's attention. If red happens to be their favorite, you can make sure that thing is red. Or you could use tape or some other means to help bring color into the object to help them know what to look at if you're working with something at a further distance. If an object has just one color, rather than being multicolored, it's often easier to recognize. I have a couple of things I was going to show you. So like here, this is just a red apple. It's easier to look at this as a whole and recognize that it's an apple than looking at an apple that might have a design on it. Like let's say my apple had stripes on it. It would be harder to recognize that it's an apple because it's not a solid color. Consider adding brightly colored tape or a favorite color to stairs, thresholds, buttons, handles, things you want to call attention to so the child knows what to look at. Just a few things about color. Light. Face your child. So a child can be distracted by light and light can help them. So we have to look at it both ways. If they tend to gaze at a lamp or the overhead light or the light coming in from the window, make sure and turn them away from that so that they can focus their attention on looking at what you want them to look at. Try closing the shades or the curtains also helps. And then on the other hand, if light helps the child, consider using toys that light up and consider using something that's called a spotlight technique. With the spotlight technique, you shine a light at the object that you want the child to visually attend to. It's really important, and Rachel reminded me of this when we were chatting, not to use the flashlight where it's going to distract the child, but hold it behind the child's head so that the child is looking at where the spotlight is and not the flashlight. Movement, you might want to use movement to help a child find what you want them to see. So you would move it. But there are some children who aren't able to see it moving and need it to be still. Shiny objects give the illusion of movement. So sometimes a child might really like shiny things because it gives that illusion of movement. Consider the environmental distractions. Remove noise, movement, and other distractions when you can. Some children might even need a separate room to work in, or maybe a corner of that room where they're a little bit, or a corner of the main room so that they're a little bit away from the distractions. Often children with CVI can attend to many sensory components at once. They might have to first listen, have a wait time, then look, then have a wait time. And that includes touching too. Some children, if you're touching them or handling them to help them do something, might not be able to use their vision at the same time. Social engagement, that's so important, and I think it's sometimes forgotten. We always need to identify who we are when we enter the room. Hi, Rachel, it's Janet. Often children with CVI have trouble with that facial recognition, and some aren't even able to look at faces. So I'm going to take that guesswork out of it. I don't want them to have to work on that. I'm going to tell them who I am, and I'm also going to tell them when I leave. Pause after speaking to give the child extra time to auditorily process what you've said. And along with that, you can always preview an activity with a child, and that helps them anticipate and helps them know what's going to happen. So tell them about the activities or the experience or a new activity or environment through a verbal description, or maybe even using an object or an adapted visual image. Rather than just springing something new, you can prepare them a little bit. The last thing with social engagement, often children with CVI don't know what's happening in the distance. They may hear a sound, they don't know what it is. You can just tell them about it. Tell them if there's like somebody's crying and upset, maybe your child is worried about that and wondering about it and can't work on their other activities because of that. You can explain it to them, and maybe that'll help. Next is that form accessibility and visual recognition. It helps to use familiar toys, especially at the beginning of that CVI journey. They might know their cup at home, but they might not know my cup. So using a familiar object at the beginning of that journey is very important. As a child starts to learn about 2D, switch from 3D to 2D, there's many different things we're going to incorporate. I just want to mention maybe pairing the 3D object they know about with the 2D picture, which is, again, simple in nature, against a background that's contrasting and only one thing on page, no words on the page. Real photographs are often easier to recognize, and abstract, like picture symbols, unfortunately are the most difficult to recognize. And last, Paula talked about it. I'm going to talk about it. I think Rachel's talking about it. And those are visual breaks. And we can talk about a visual break or a brain break, but read your child's cues and give them a break before they have a meltdown or before they're crying to say, I've had too much. They might need a quiet room or maybe something else to help them reset. And that's something that you can brainstorm with your TVI, or you can brainstorm with the therapists at NAPA. You know, what might help that child reset. Thank you so much. One more little slide, Anna, and this is going to be quick because we already touched on it. This is just a brief presentation. We're just touching on the surface. I know we're talking about a lot. And then just that the field of CVI, or cortical visual impairment, is constantly evolving as we more research gets done and we learn about that research. So thank you so much. Rachel, parent extraordinaire, is next. Thanks.
Thanks, Janet and Paula. All right, let me spotlight you, Rachel. Maybe. All right, Rachel, you are good to go.
Excellent. Hello, everybody. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Anna, for asking me to be here. This is so exciting. So this is much newer to me. I have a lot less experience in this world than Paula and Janet do, learning a ton from them, as well as, you know, the whole world that we have around us here in Austin. So this is my daughter, Moira. She's 3.5. We go to NAPA Austin, and we've been going there for about 2 years. She was diagnosed with CVI about 19 months old, and I will get into her journey here. She also has a rare disease. It's an ultra rare disease called Cat6B, which is about 160 people in the world currently that have that diagnosis. So pretty rare. We technically got the CVI diagnosis first, and then we got Cat6B, but we didn't know it, and I will dive into that too. My world is a little bit different. I will tell you guys a little bit about me. I came from the corporate world. I was a VP at the company, ran all of our corporate office facilities. And then after I had Moira, I realized that the two things don't go well together, and she needed my full attention. So she has it now. And I have just dove headfirst into all things Cat6 and CVI. Our story began, Moira was in the NICU for about 6 weeks. And we noticed some things a little bit here and there with her where she, and I'm sure a lot of you with kids with diagnosed with CVI will attest to this too on some of these, where it's like, it looks like they're constantly looking past you and not like at you in the face. And so you're like, is she looking at me? Is she not? Sometimes it felt like she was. She wouldn't reach out for toys, and she wouldn't engage with toys. It was very early on, even in the NICU before we even brought her home, that we were like, why isn't she reaching for anything? Like, why isn't she looking at anything? And then some days she would look at stuff, and we're like, oh, okay, she can see. But she wouldn't track anything, whether it was me and my husband, our dogs, our other family members, toys, whatever. And I think the biggest frustration about all of the things that we noticed is the fluctuation, because then you start second guessing yourself. You're like, am I making things up, or is that actually what's happening here? Like, is there something wrong with her vision, or am I just being a paranoid new parent? So you're like, you literally start questioning yourself back and forth. But it was when we started, Paula touched on this earlier on the different types of visual impairments. And we started noticing some other things with Moira where like her right eye was dilating more than the left. And we were like, okay, so that's on top of already not tracking, not engaging with toys, not looking at us, looking past us. Okay, there's more going on here. And my husband's like, I don't think she can see. And so we take her to the ophthalmologist. They say, her right eye was weaker. We did patching. They're like, okay, here's your plan. They give us a piece of paper, and it says possible CVI at the bottom of the piece of paper. But the ophthalmologist never said it to us, never verbalized it to us, didn't point it out, and just said, okay, here's your piece of paper. You can take it to your ECI program in your area, which is early childhood intervention, and they'll get you set up with services. And, get these patches for her eye, and off we went. So we walked out with a diagnosis that we didn't know that we had, and it took us 6 months to get early childhood intervention services assigned to us. And that was when we found our team. We are super, super, super blessed to have an amazing team, an O&M and a TVI who came to our house, which is usually the case when they're under the age of 3. And they taught me that CVI is a brain-based visual impairment. It has nothing to do with the health of the eyes. And that doesn't mean, Paula mentioned earlier that there can be some combination of other things going on, but CVI itself is brain-based. And I was just like, wait, what? I don't understand what that means. I didn't know anything about it. They gave me a whole host of information that I could dive into, and I'm the type of person that loves to do that. They set us up with a low vision evaluation, which you guys can check in your state. And Anna will send out a resource guide that I put together after this call that she can send out to everybody. And I included state visual impaired, blind and visually impaired programs for every single state. So you can look at that and you can talk to them about it. They can pay for it, or the school districts can help pay for low vision evaluations in a lot of the states. Obviously, they vary greatly. And in Texas, they do it every 2 years. So they paid for that. They hooked us up with a low vision optometrist. And Paula also mentioned the visual fields, which was really interesting because when we go and get our eyes checked, we don't see that like she's, optometrist is holding up a light over here, and she's bringing it slowly forward, waiting to see Moira's reaction, to see when she can see it, and did the same up here, the same over here, the same down here. And that was really interesting because I was like, how are they going to check this? You know, my daughter's nonverbal. She's got multiple disabilities. Like, I don't understand. So they really did kind of wrap their arms around me and give me as much guidance as they could, which I am very grateful for. She confirmed, yes, I think she does have CVI. The TVI and O&M did the CVI range assessment, which is the assessment that was developed by Dr. Roman. And that was, you know, that's been ongoing for some years. I know Paula mentioned the CVI, the Perkins CVI protocol, which is another form assessment that you can do. Either one is fine. Whichever one your TVI does, let them roll with it because they're both great. And then I kind of, you know, I got myself a little overwhelmed. I'm one of those people that when I get a diagnosis or information, I want to dive headfirst into everything. And here are some things that I wish I knew before I started to fully panic on everything, is that vision can improve when we change the environment and with the right supports. So that is number one. I want anybody who's on this call, it's got a kiddo that just got diagnosed, please don't feel like all hope is lost, because it's not the case. You guys are taking the first right step. You're here and you're learning, and that's great. I know Paula also mentioned neuroplasticity earlier, and that's huge. So the brain is this fascinating thing where it can start rewiring itself through repetition and focus. And, you know, the more that you do something like that, the more those neurons will keep firing together and they find new pathways. So I'll give you a really quick example. It's like, say you're trying to get from Boulder to Centennial. Okay, I'm talking to the Denver folks, obviously. And all of a sudden you're on I-25 going past downtown, and by Mile High Stadium, I-25 is totally blown up. It's not there anymore. And you're like, wait, this is how I get across. I don't understand. So what happens is you've got to trek around and around, and we know that takes a lot of time. If you got to get off the highway in Denver, it's going to take a lot of time. So you've got to give them more time. It's going to take a lot more time to figure it out. And if you had to do that day and day and day after day, then building that neuroplasticity, you're not going to have to check your GPS anymore. You're going to know how to get there in the back way. And that's just one way for me to kind of put it into place in my brain, of be like, hey, this is how this works. So just know that there is a path forward. Early intervention is amazing. Not only does it help you build a holistic plan kind of going forward and kind of gives you checks and balances of where they started and then milestones and seeing kind of where they go and how you can adapt as you learn the certain types of things that are good for them, but it also empowers the parent. You know, I mean, this is Paula and Jan and I were just talking about how crazy of a topic this is and how huge of a topic this is. And it is way too big of a topic to do it in this amount of time. This is why we're all like rambling as fast as we can, trying to get through all of this information. And so just know that, like, take it step by step. Don't do too much. Don't do what I did and go off the deep end and just overwhelm yourself with everything. Just take baby steps and get a little bit more information every time. And then that will empower you to keep going and then share with others. The other thing is the progress in this is not linear. So it's not like you going to the gym and working toward, you know, doing 10 push-ups when you could only ever do one. It's not like that. There's going to be good days, or bad moments, good moments, sometimes in the same day. It depends on what's going on in the world. And so it can be like, hey, they were fine this morning. They woke up great. I felt like they could really see me and look me in the face. And then they went to therapy, or school, and it was a loud environment. There was, you know, so many kids around, lots of stuff. And then all of a sudden they came home and it didn't feel like they could see anything. That happens. And that's totally normal. And that's where those vision and brain breaks come in that we all love to talk about so much. And I will show you what we do here at my house too. So there's a community. You're not alone. Here's some Facebook groups. And there's also the state programs. Like I said, resources. Anna's going to send those out to you guys afterward. And always feel free to reach out to me too if you have questions about those. So vision and brain breaks. I kind of touched on this just with the last slide up is, that vision kind of coming and going, and it can be, they get in a grumpy mood, they start crying, and you're like, I can't figure out what's wrong with them. They're so upset. And it might just be they got totally overwhelmed and they're having what's called like a CVI meltdown. And so for me, like, it's only happened a couple of times with Moira, but when it happens, it's big. And the only thing is you got to cuddle and snuggle and quiet and dark. That's usually what works for us. And the reason this is so important is because our brains work incredibly hard to process all of the information. I was looking up some stats and it just kind of blew my mind that it takes 18 milliseconds for what your eyes take in for your brain to start processing. That's you and I, right? So think about it. As you're driving down the highway and you're seeing like cars going this way, cars going this way, you're seeing signs, you're seeing turnoffs, people are going different speeds, and we're all able to get all of that information coming in and processing at this fast rate. And more than 50% of our brain is used in that visual processing in more than 30 different areas of the brain, which to me is like mind-blowing. And apparently, those visual processing centers use an incredibly large amount of the oxygen and glucose supply. So what you'll see is if your kid has been working really, really hard with their vision, or even physically, if they're at NAPA and there's a lot of stuff going on, you'll see them kind of start, either they'll have a CVI meltdown, or what Moira does, I said she wilts like a flower. Like she just goes, and her little head just drops, and you're like, okay, she's cooked. We need to give her a little bit of quiet time. And some of her therapists are on this call and they can attest to it. And vision is more than just seeing, it's interpreting. And that is one thing that I never thought about before I ever heard of the term CVI, honestly. Never even occurred to me that, that was a huge part of it. And again, that neuroplasticity, repetition builds those visual pathways. So some home modifications. Jan talked about this with the covering up of stuff. The first thing I did is I went to the fabric store and I went to like the bulk fabric section and I found the cheapest black fabric I could find. And I was like, cut me off a couple of yards of that. And that's what I used. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be fancy. And then I was saying I couldn't find a black trifold. So I went and I found cardboard and I painted it black from the dollar store. So I used to put this in front of her while she was eating, and I would have this. And it would be a yellow bowl and her solid red spoon. And that was how we modified her feeding regimen at home so that she could focus in on what she was doing. And like I said, it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't need to be fancy. Use what you have around your house if you've got something like that. And then in terms of toys, she is one of those people who likes her light up toys and her musical toys. In this photo on the right, on the bottom, is her little dog toy. And what I will say is if you do have a kiddo that likes light up things and musical things, is choose items that the buttons themselves light up so that when they engage with it, if they're trying to get hit toward the light, they're actually hitting a button and they're getting that feedback response. Because we have a few toys that the buttons didn't light up and it doesn't work as well for her. So that would be my recommendation if that's something that your kid really likes. Modified books and toys. So one thing, I'm just showing you guys lots of things. This is called an all-in-one board. One side is black felt and one side is magnet, and you can flip the stand around. This is something that she was learning in school. So this is just, I printed this out and put Velcro on it. And she was learning about bugs in school. So I just made these things that she could capture her little bugs and put them in her bug jar. And it was something that she could see because what they had wasn't as accessible to her. So you can do the same thing with books. If you have a favorite book, you want to just print out photos and cut them out and just stick some Velcro on them. You can use black felt, again, from the fabric store, put it on a piece of cardboard. It doesn't need to be fancy. I will say this all-in-one board is amazing. If you have a TVI and an O&M, or you get with the state program, they can buy that for you from APH. So APH is American Printing House for the Blind. Let them buy those things for you, because as medical parents, we know everything is insanely expensive, and get help where you can. So please ask for those types of things. They can get you Switch toys, books. Seedlings is another one for books that is a free option for folks. You get 5 free books a year from Seedlings, and any resources that you need. Like they've got chairs even that give proper support for a kiddo, for them to have accessibility for them to be able to see. So I can't remember which one of you said it, but it's like you want proper support in your body. You don't want to work on something physical if you're working on vision at the same time, because it's just too much to focus on. And I already talked about the feeding, well, a little bit. And then if you had like, oh, that was the other thing, is like, if you have a bottle, her sippy cup, her straw cup, I just put this red thing on it. When she had her bottle too, I took non-toxic nail polish and I painted the top of it red, like bright red. And that was really helpful for her to be able to see when she needed that. So just get creative. Get super creative about what works for them. Quiet spaces. So this is just a normal play gym for every kid. And that is the black piece of fabric that I got from the fabric store that I just draped over the top. And then her TVI and O&M got her that light board that's there on the left and made her her first bead curtain, which she still loves to this day. So use what you have. You know, these kiddos, it's expensive, and all their stuff is expensive. So use what you have. Don't think that you need to go out and get the latest and greatest of everything. If this is what you have and you can do this, then do that. And I started with just a regular blanket, by the way, the first day. I was like, just threw over the darkest color blanket I had in my house. But you want to try to do something solid. So if you can just go and get a piece of fabric, that works too. Then we upgraded to this one. So this one is called a little room. This was made by her TVI and O&M. You can go on YouTube and you can Google, or excuse me, you can search in the window for little room, CVI little room, and it'll give you instructions on how to make it. It's just made out of PVC pipe. The idea around it is to keep the same toys in there for a while so that it gets them to see and learn and be comfortable with all the things that are in there. The more you see them engage with more things in there, then you can switch one out. And they engage with all those things, and then you switch one out. And you start where they are, and then you expand upon it. So that's kind of my general rule of thumb when it comes to that. Then my favorite one is this guy. So this is her current one. We just bought a floor bed off of Amazon, which is the top wooden part with the gates around it. And we custom built the bottom of the bed and then just put them together. And so we create her own CVI den underneath of her bed. And she loves it. So we were at NAPA earlier today. We had 3 sessions at NAPA. We came home. First thing we did is she goes in there and she's like, she's like, I have recovered. Because on the way home, she had her head dropped. She's like, I am wiped, guys. And then we go in there and then she's giggling up a storm and she has a blast. So this is why it's so important to give those vision and brain breaks. The second she comes home from school, she goes in there so that she has that quiet time to herself to kind of recharge, settle in her space. She knows all of her familiar things. She knows where everything is. And it just helps quiet that mind and kind of recharge herself. If you don't have space for something like this and you want something more temporary, you can easily do like a little pop-up black tent there on Amazon. That'll be in the resource guide as well, if that's something easy for you. I do have a couple of friends that have done that. That has been really helpful for their kiddos. So that's an option. Advice to parents is trust your instincts. You know, sometimes you do question yourself, but deep down inside, you know, like if you see something that's up, or you see something that's going on when they come home from school or at home or at therapy, and you're like, I feel like we should change something. Speak up. You know, you are their best advocate. So speak up, and you know what works for your child. And the more you learn them, the more you watch them, the more that you're going to be able to adapt and to be able to speak up for them. And like I said earlier, You don't need fancy things. Just make intentional choices for each one of your kiddos. You know, learning them is the most important thing, because like Paula said, is you've met one kid with CVI, you've met one kid with CVI. And that's very true. Don't be afraid to teach others. I mean, everybody that's on this call from NAPA Austin can tell you, I talk about it all the time. So I do not shut up about it. I talk about it at school so much that her teacher ended up putting light covers in the classroom and keeps the lights off half the way, keeps, you know, she has brain breaks. She's got a little room in her classroom, and her little best friend at school, who is amazing, will go up to the teacher and advocate for her when I am not there. And he'll be like, you know, Miss Laney, Moira likes the lights off, or Miss Kelsey, Moira doesn't like loud sounds, so we need to be gentle with our voices. It's amazing. Kids are amazing. So teach everyone, tell everyone, everywhere you go. People will be receptive to it if you explain why, and then they see the benefit of it. And trust me, they will listen. Final words is, your child is super capable. You know, the brain is capable. Neuroplasticity is amazing. And you don't have to know everything. You just got to take the next step, and then learn a little bit, and then take the next step. Please don't dive too deep like I did, because you'll overwhelm yourself. And hope grows when you meet your child where they are. So really just meeting them where they are in their own moment. This is Moira in the CVI room at NAPA Austin, and obviously you can see she very much enjoys it, and she's got attention, she's giving eye contact, she's engaged, and that is really amazing to see, because that was not the case previously. So starting where they are and kind of building on that, speaking up for them, can go a long way. And then feel free to reach out to me anytime. Contact me, stay in touch. If you want to see all the modifications that I do for Moira, I usually share those on her Instagram. Feel free to, reach out to me there, or I'm also at Little Dandelion Press on Instagram as well. That's all I got.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was wonderful. I learned a lot too.
Yay.
Yeah. All right. We have a couple questions in our Q&A. Let me spotlight you guys. All right. Christina asked, or said that Paula mentioned the difficulty of reaching and looking at an object at the same time. Can this be improved? This was a primary reason we had to switch from direct access AAC to eye gaze. He seems to be doing better with the eye gaze talker, but we only started using this recently. How successful, or what's your opinion on individuals with CVI using eye gaze for their communication? Anyone can answer this.
I would love to chat on this really fast, and I'll let you guys chime in, because my daughter is actually using eye gaze right now. So we've been testing it out at NAPA Austin, and when we started testing out different AAC devices, I was really surprised, because I thought that maybe one of the switch ones might be better for her. I didn't realize with her having CVI that eye gaze could actually work. And she is surprising us, honestly, with her amount of attention to it. And it's been incredible. Now, the one thing I will say, and maybe Janet and Paula can chime in on it, is you have to make sure settings are on there in a way that kind of minimalizes what's on the screen, so they don't have too much visual fatigue if they use it a lot throughout the day. So I'll let you guys chime in.
I just wanted to say, the first part of your question was, can it improve? And 100% yes. Again, put accommodations in place, put strategies in place, and it can improve.
I was going to say, as far as the look and reach, it can just be very time consuming, and will need a lot of patience on your part of just giving them that wait time and wait time, and then a little bit more wait time. And that might just be when you're holding it on the right side, and then you might have to practice on the left side and start all over again with that wait time. So just be patient, but keep doing it. Try different colors, try different faces, try different lights, try different positions when you're doing that. And you may find that it starts coming in together more often or more quickly in different positions. I would also say you could also, I like to use things that have like a vertical component to them, like a slinky or something, or like something with ribbons or different things tied to it. So when you're holding something in front of your child's eyes, it could be dangling down on their hands, and they might not have to actually lift their arm or their hand all the way up to where it is in front of their face to reach for it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. We just want them to be making that connection between looking and like something touching their hand, even if it's just very briefly. That can help also build on that look and reach at the same time, just making that connection between, oh gosh, when I'm seeing something, I'm also feeling something with my hands, which can then motivate that movement a little bit more. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes,
Janet.
and I just wanted to piggyback on something Rachel said earlier, and that is that the vision might change from day to day. So it might be that you've gotten to the point at home or in a very quiet environment, your little one can look and reach. But then let's say you go to the grocery store or you go to therapy or there's a lot going on with the TV and company, they might not be able to in that circumstance. So just to keep in mind, the environment will impact where they are with that.
As far as the eye gaze device, my best recommendation would be to make sure that your TVI is involved in every step of that process. They're going to be your child's best advocate for trying to find the right size pictures. And as Janet mentioned this earlier too, if it's a picture of their items, like their ball, their book, their bottle, whatever that is, things that they are familiar with, they've already had experience with playing, touching, all of that before they're going to be able to recognize and understand, some of like the different icons. And sometimes kids pick those icons up really quickly, but it's still better to like to work your way through the steps. There is a hierarchy of learning, pictures and understanding, and your TBI will be able to help walk you through that. And then again, just like, not just with calibrating the device, but the positioning, you where things are placed. If you have a kiddo who doesn't see well, in the right, like their lower right visual field, we might not want to put their favorite things in on that side, at least starting off with. Maybe we would move that eventually to get a visual scan towards that area. But so again, the positioning really, matters. And I know with those eye gaze devices, they need to be a certain distance away. And so the size of those pictures is going to matter too.
Great. Thank you guys for answering that one. Our next question comes from Carrie. She said that after you use the modifications and strategies and find that you achieved increased visual attention to objects, what are the next steps? Is there a hierarchy you would follow? For example, next focus on visual tracking, reaching, cognitive identifications, etc.
I say you can answer that question by looking at your child's routine. Rachel was talking about feeding, playtime, dressing. So look at your child's routine and where is your child needing some help with accommodations, or where do they need some help with being able to access the activity and achieve the activity? And then that will help you answer that question. I think it's unique to every child. I don't know if there's necessarily a next step, but I say look at your child's needs, look at their routine and where they are in their development to help know what that next step would be.
And I'll touch on that too when you said activities of what they're doing and wanting to have success in that. One thing that my daughter had a lot of struggle with early on, she really loved baths. And then as we started to discover, well, she was growing out of her baby phase where she would fall asleep in a bathtub, to being super aware, but then not knowing where she was, because she couldn't see anything in the bathroom. It was like she didn't understand where she was. And so we told her TVI and O&M, and we showed her, the bath toys that we used, and they made her this little bath book. And so we showed it to her before we got in the bathtub. So we're like, here's your duck. Here's your little cups that we use to pour the water over you. And she could see these. And they're the real objects. You see, this is just attached to this. So they're the real sized objects that were in the bathtub with her. The little spinners that we would put on the side of the bathtub. And so that she could feel more comfortable getting into something, seeing the same things that she saw that we were showing her when she was sitting in our lap, and she felt more comfortable with it. So when you're talking about different routines, it's like you really do have to take it into every single routine. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, she was scared of the bathtub for quite a while, and that would cause her moro reflex, which is that startle reflex, to really flare a lot, and she would just go into panic mode. And it takes time, but those types of things is helping them work that type of information into a routine and showing that ahead of doing it. Then they're like, oh, this isn't so scary because I was just looking at these same exact objects in a different space.
Awesome. We just had another question did you want to add anything, Paula?
I was just going to jump on to what Rachel just shared and the accessibility piece. When your kiddos are tired or not feeling well, or all the things we've chatted about, and vision may be the first thing to go, or maybe they are trying to use it and they can a little bit, how else can we make the activity accessible? So if you take the vision piece away, how are they learning and again, accessing that information? And so that book, Rachel, you just made or showed, is beautiful because that gives the tactual component to it. And that so often supports the visual learning and recognition of those items. So if they can have something that is really tangible, they can get their little hands on, that just helps support their learning and understanding that much more. And then as a second piece to that, sorry, maybe not a bath time book if you want it to be waterproof, but from that, what Rachel just showed, then perhaps you could move to real photographs of that, of a yellow duck against a black background, the little spinner, the pink cups, whatever that is. Then you would start pairing those together as a next step of the real object to a picture.
Great. Next question is from another Anna. She said, I love that you are doing DMI in the CVI room. What other modifications or adaptations have DMI therapists made to accommodate CVI? So I can answer part of that. Maybe Rachel, if you've noticed anything else, you can chime in. Unfortunately, at Denver, we don't have a CVI room yet, but we often take kids into just private treatment rooms, and we will bring some DMI equipment in there. We have a room that we painted all black, or most of the walls are black, and covered the lights up top, and we have like a big fish tank type looking thing. So a lot of times when our kids are getting overwhelmed or feeling, we can tell that they're getting dysregulated, we'll bring them in there. We also have a couple therapists who have started outlining the boxes and our bars with red masking tape, just so the children can actually visually tend to where their feet are being placed. Because obviously we help at the feet or at the ankles, hopefully during DMI, but we also want our children visually attending to where their feet are going. So we have found that has been helpful. Sometimes if no treatment rooms are available, we'll just turn the lights off in the DMI gym, and most of the time the other kids think it's fun and we're having a dance party. And so if you have kids in there who will tolerate having the lights low, we'll do that as well. Rachel, have you noticed anything at the Chicago clinic?
At Austin, yes.
Yes, Austin, sorry.
That's okay. I was like, ooh, I haven't gone to Chicago yet, but I want to. I want to go to all of them. One thing that I say before we even had the CVI room, so Austin expanded, it's like twice the size of it was before last summer. And before we had the additional space, the DMI area was quieter. If Moira was there, if another kid was there with CVI, they, just check around, make sure everybody's okay, and they would turn off the lights in that area. If there was a private room available, we would do that and turn the lights off in there as long as it didn't interrupt anybody else. Lowering the blinds, having flashlights in there to highlight a toy, backlighting something. So one of her very first therapists had like a little lamp that she put in there, and then she put a toy that could kind of see through in front of it, so it was backlit. Those things were really helpful. If you are out on the open floor, I've seen where, maybe they just do one mat over from the louder kids if they're there. So just talking to the other therapists and saying like, okay, who do you have at this time? And maybe we can kind of separate. They're really great at that when they do the mat assignments, and really thoughtful about who they put next to each other, which I'm so appreciative because it does help a lot. And because you're not always going to be able to have like a private space or whatever, the CVI room in Austin is quite large. And so we've been in there before with, you've got another kid in there. I think one time we had 3 kids in there at one time. But it was nice because they were all like more on the quieter side, and they're kind of just focused on their own thing. The other thing is that I've noticed NAPA therapists is thinking outside the box. Wendy in Austin is really, really great at that, and coming up with new things that she gets for the space, whether they're light up drumsticks or having the UT students make projects for her. They did like one of those glowing pegboards, and there's a push button thing that highlights different colors. It can be a piano, it can be different things, but it lights up and you can push buttons, and the buttons are like this big, and it's quite large, so it's really cool. And so they really go above and beyond. It's just having that conversation, like I said earlier, being the best advocate you can for your kid and speaking up and say, hey, they have CVI, and just knowing like, when all of these folks go to school, whether it's therapists, doctors, and TVIs even, like, it's not a requirement for them to study CVI. So they don't normally get that. So it's like if they learn it, they learn it after they get out of school more often than not. I haven't heard of anybody who's learned it at school. So if I'm wrong on that, I apologize. But more often than not, I've heard that nobody gets that training early on. So if they have some, it's because they took the effort to learn it later. And don't assume that everybody's going to know what your child needs, even if they do know about CVI. So speak up for what your child needs. And they're really accommodating and they're really amazing. So speak up and they will listen. I promise you.
Yes, I find it very helpful when parents know and let me know what things work best for their child. Because we do see so many kids who have CVI, it's easy for my brain to just lump it all together, whereas something that might work for one kid might not work for the other. So I do find it very helpful when parents communicate that with me. Janet, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and the other thing is invite your TVI to come to NAPA. So just check with the administration, make sure it's okay. But I've gone to NAPA with quite a few of my families, and it's always helpful. We can always brainstorm different ideas and different ways that we might be able to help children. So think about inviting your TVI to go with you.
No, that's a great idea.
Second that. Moira's TVI and O&M did go to NAPA with me several times, and then they also did a lunch and learn with a NAPA therapist. So it's amazing. So I second that. Definitely do that.
if that's a possibility too, because sometimes what TVIs as the teachers may see at home or even in the classroom may look a lot different how they're using their vision when they're at NAPA. So being able to have those conversations with the NAPA therapists and obviously parents to make sure that the right supports are being put in place. To that point also, sometimes we'll see kiddos like making some improvements with how they're using their vision at home, and then they go to preschool or they go to grandma's house and they're not able to do those same things. And so again, just remember that it's hard and they will get there. So it's not that they're losing skills, it's just they're learning to use those skills in different environments, and that's can be equally challenging for them.
All right, I think we have our last question from Riley. It seems like it is a 2-in-1. Oops, sorry. What does it mean when an optometrist diagnoses moderate CVI? And they have noticed that their son, along with the others with his same syndrome, are really love TV. Do you think that's correlated at all? And yeah.
So I think that maybe what the optometrist is referring to is in CVI, some people refer to beginning of CVI as like a phase 1. And if there's a phase 2, and then as you develop more of your vision skills, there's a phase 3. I wonder if he or she means moderate, meaning, they're not at the beginning level of their CVI journey, but they're not advanced either. They're just in the middle of being able to learn how to use their vision and recognize things around them. And then the second part of your question, I had part of that, Anna, but what was that again?
They have noticed that their son, along with other people with his syndrome, really it says might be a silly question, but the kids seem to really love TV.
Yeah, no, it's not silly because we talked about color, light, and movement, and a TV has those things. The screen lights up. Often there's bright colors on the TV, especially if you have a kids show on, and there's a lot of movement. So I don't think it's odd.
One thing I will chime in there, no, I don't think it's odd either. My daughter loves Hey Bear sensory videos on YouTube. They have a black background and it's like dancing fruit and vegetables. She's really into that. She watches other things too, but that's how she wakes up every day. She's like, the second she hears it, she's like, eyes pop open. The first thing you said about saying your optometrist said it was moderate, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but most optometrists are not trained in a CVI assessment. So an assessment is what is going to give you your range and kind of where they fall along how affected they are, whether they're moderate, mild, heavily affected, with however their vision is. Optometrists are not trained to do that. So that's where you go to these two right here. These two can give you an assessment that would give you that range. So they're the ones that would say, oh, they are, they'll give you a score that will coincide to a range. And then therefore you can start kind of thinking about what modifications could be in line based on what your child is into and engaged with and how they function with their vision.
Yeah, I would second that. In Colorado specifically, our community of pediatric ophthalmologists are fantastic about not just the diagnostic piece, but then saying, okay, go work with your TVI to figure out the details of all of that. So the medical professionals are really the ophthalmologists, optometrists, neuro-ophthalmologists or neurologists, or sometimes even like certified low vision specialists. But so they are course, the ones who will diagnose CVI, but then the teachers of the visually impaired, we can't do the diagnosis, but we do the assessments to make sure we know, like, functionally, play, learning, all the, the daily routines, and then the educational component of that once they turn 3, how their vision is impacting all of those things. And again, like Rachel said, that's where the TVI comes into play.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that is all we have time for tonight. I just want to thank you, Rachel, Janet, and Paula, for your time and your expertise. I know this was helpful to me as a therapist, so I can only imagine how helpful it was to parents. This meeting was recorded. I think the plan, I'm going to send it to Katie, our marketing head. I think the plan was to put it on YouTube, and then I'm thinking maybe I can link the resources on the YouTube video. So once we have that up, I'll send it to Rachel, Janet, and Paula. You guys can use it as needed, and then we'll probably post it on the NAPA social media as well.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your night.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.